And now, before going to the panel discussions, we, Yunchol and I, are delighted to have the presence at the venue from the city of Hiroshima, the host city of 48th ATCM in 2026. A delegation headed by Ms. Chizuko Kawamura, Director of Internationalization Department, Citizens Affairs Bureau, Hiroshima City, accompanied by Director Masatoshi Nosaka, thank you, and the Supervisor Yuta Inomaru. Thank you very much for coming to us. Thank you. Mic, please. Mic, please.
Thank you very much for we thank the organizer of this workshop for inviting us to participate in this workshop. We have very little knowledge of the Treaty of Antarctic Treaty, but I believe the Hiroshima is symbolic and a suitable place for 48th ATCM meeting because the basics of the treaty is peace, and Hiroshima is everyone agree that Hiroshima is the symbolic place for the peace. Now we have prepared the preparation, start preparation for the meeting. So we are very much looking forward to welcoming you in May 2026. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that message. Thank you. Now, I will be chairing the panel discussion number 1. The title is Peace and Science, and it's basically an open discussion forum, but we have prepared a few topics for possible discussions, and those are on the website. And for maybe before going to those topics, perhaps may I ask Dr. Nakamura to return your messages to the two youngsters who have made a very strong message to us. Can I maybe ask you to comment on them? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe let me reply very briefly. First of all, thank you very much for your very strong message, which expressed, I understood, both the expectation as well as frustration. To us. And I took very careful note of that, which should at the same time form the basis, as well as the insight other relevant stakeholders within the government to make even additional efforts for the success of the ATCM 48 in Hiroshima. And very briefly about the climate change, the subject both of you mentioned, our intent is to create resonant effect deriving from the ATS. And I'm talking about resonant effect because the actions which are exclusively taken within the Antarctic Club would not suffice in resolving or even mitigating the global warming. So the action should be explored, deployed outside the Antarctic system. And that's what we intend in the context of the ATS. And I would appreciate it. It could, both of you and your colleagues could support such efforts. Thank you.
All right, so let's go right into the discussions. So the first topic we proposed for the panel was peace in Antarctica and the significance of Hiroshima ATCM. And I will be making the topic setting talk within 5 minutes. So we only have 5 minutes each for topic setting talks. So again, Nakamura-san, the Hiroshima ATCM chaired by Japan would be an excellent opportunity to reconfirm the peaceful use principle of Antarctica, particularly in order to dissipate more recent and harder to detect concerns and allegations of non-peaceful and resource-oriented dual uses of Antarctic science and technologies by strengthening the transparency mechanisms under the treaty system. I fully agree with you that the key is to increase the transparency of Antarctic activities, but the recent governance efforts within the ATCM to achieve such strengthened transparency under the agenda item on the improvement of EIES, the Electronic Information Exchange System, have not attracted sufficient political support. So Nakamura-san specifically mentioned the EIES issue as one of the key issues that was addressed in the Kochi, and also the Japan intends to follow up that agenda item. Is very, very welcome sign. Thank you very much for that. The improvement of and the effective use of the EIES for the purpose of increasing the transparency so as to dissipate any concerns of inappropriate potential dual use of Antarctic science is, however, a much complex problem today, both factually and legally, and requires strategic perspective going beyond the technical improvements of the EIES. For example, the use of military facilities and personnel in Antarctica, which is allowed under Article 1.2 of the treaty, can be verified objectively as being used for the scientific purposes only if the EIES contains detailed information on the number and function of the military personnel landed on the Antarctica and what kind of logistical support activities they conduct in Antarctica. Article 7.5a, at its face, may not require such detailed information to be exchanged, but when one considers this provision to be important for a transparency mechanism in light of modern technology and geopolitical tensions, the consultative parties should support a proactive use of this mechanism by broadening the scope of expected information to be provided. If you go through the information entered currently in the EIS, I have to say that this kind of outside verification would be very, very difficult in many cases, or even impossible in a few cases where those information are not entered at all. Thank you. So this is my topic setting talk. Maybe without, unless there's a burning comment to my talk, I think we can go to our next panelist, who is Jeff McGee, as I have introduced to you, professor at the University of Tasmania, maybe following up on some of the talks. So Jeff, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shibata. I'd like to make three quick points about the geopolitical context of recent Antarctic Treaty Consultative meetings and how these things might play out over the next few years at the meetings to come. The first point that I would like to make is about international political tensions spilling over into Antarctic Treaty System meetings. It's important to realise that the Antarctic Treaty was formed in the 1950s at a time of high geopolitical tension. However, has been very successful in managing geopolitical tensions within the region, and particularly stopping tensions from outside impacting upon the region and upon the meetings of the ATS. The classic example of this is, of course, the Falklands Islands, Islas Malvinas conflict in the early 1980s between Argentina and the UK, where those countries continued to operate within the ATS meetings in a business as usual way, despite the fact that they were in conflict outside. However, since 2002, with the Russia-Ukraine armed conflict, what we have seen is this spilling over into the ATCM and also the CAMLA meeting, with strong statements by mainly Western countries and against the Russian action in Ukraine, and also diplomatic walkouts of the meetings when Russia responded. So there is concern that these wider tensions of the international system are spilling over into the ATCM meeting, and this is impacting on issues like the Canadian and Belarus consultative party status issue. The second point I'd like to make is in relation to the expectations on the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting in regard to the issue of climate change. And what I'll have to say here might be a little bit controversial given some of the earlier comments. Look, it's long been said by the scientists that the polar areas will suffer earlier and more extreme impacts from climate change. And this appears to be coming to pass with the very significant reductions in sea ice that we've seen over recent years, and also concerns around glacial destabilisation in West Antarctica. But despite the mandate of the Madrid Protocol for environmental protection of the region, the fact is the ATCM doesn't really have the ability to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions in and of itself. And of course, these greenhouse gas emissions are the long-term driver of environmental change in Antarctica. What the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting can do is to reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions within the region itself, from research stations and from shipping and other things. It can facilitate world-class science to feed into the UNFCCC climate change negotiations, and to an extent has been doing that, but can of course do better. But as I said, it can't realistically reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by itself. So it can't stop climate change impacting the region by itself. That work is going to need to be done in the UNFCCC meetings, okay? So that's important to bear in mind. However, this mismatch between the capacity of the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting and the expectations that some have of it in order to deliver on reducing global greenhouse gas emissions is leading to strongly worded academic and NGO criticism of the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting, and even calls for some radically different ideas and institutions to govern the region. The key example being recent calls for an Antarctic declaration and for animals in the region to be given legal personality and rights that could be enforced, or sorry, human proxies to speak on behalf of animals which would have legal rights in the region. So the third point is that consensus is under pressure in the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting. Of course, on matters of substance, the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting has over the last 6 decades operated under a consensus decision-making rule, and this has been seen as a strength of the system. It might be slower than other decision-making rules, but it obtains buy-in from all parties and hence greater compliance and greater legitimacy. Traditionally, this consensus decision-making process of the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting and also with the related institution CAMLA have been approached by states not as a veto or blocking opportunity, but rather as a process to find common ground on an agenda item and arrive at a decision to allow the issue to go forward. I think it's fair to say that there is concern within recent ATCM and also CAMLA meetings related to issues related to marine spatial planning, that some states are prepared to use the consensus decision-making procedure more as a veto to prevent decisions being made and agenda items being dealt with. The recent examples of this are, of course, the emperor penguin listing issue as a specially protected species under Annex 2, but also within CAMLA, the several outstanding marine protected area proposals that have gone nowhere over the last 7 to 10 years. So these marine spatial planning initiatives are something that the ATCM can deliver on due to, and can be a step forward in terms of responding to climate change, but in failing to do that, that is also adding to this NGO and academic criticism against the ATCM. So I guess my point is that the ATCM is being criticised for some things that it can't do, such as to lead on global greenhouse gas emission reduction, but is failing to deliver on some things that it can do, that is things like the emperor penguin issue and also the marine protected areas issue within CAMLA. And just in closing, I guess the thing on the horizon we all need to keep in mind is the incoming US administration under Donald Trump. What attitude will it have to the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting and Antarctic issues more broadly? So I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So unless there's a burning comment to Jeff, I think we can go on, because I think we'll continue the discussions on how the ATCM is today operating. So I'm delighted to have Ms. Indy Hodgson-Johnston, Dr. Indy Hodgson-Johnston, a senior lecturer, University of Tasmania, and she is a chief rapporteur of the ATCM from the previous one from Kochi. And she has been selected as the early to mid-career scholar being invited to this workshop. So Indy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here, Professor. So obviously I'm not speaking on behalf of the Antarctic Treaty Secretariat, but I do work for them. And in my role as Chief Rapporteur, it gives me lots of insight into the really objective functioning of the processes and procedures that actually go into the meeting itself. It's a huge meeting. It's 2 weeks. It's long. It's arduous. People are exhausted by the end of it. But what I like to research is the importance of governance, processes, procedures, all the boring things that students don't usually like looking at. But we are witnessing all these things that Jeff touched on and we've touched on earlier today, which is alongside geopolitics and climate change and all those huge challenges that we're facing in the Antarctic. We also have they're not smaller things, but they're not as obvious. So I think we'll talk about diversity in a couple of sessions too, but we've got a more diverse membership who don't operate under one of the 4 official languages. We've got newer delegations. The turnover in delegations is getting quicker, is getting faster, which means there's a loss of institutional knowledge. And there's also more packed agendas. We're trying to get so much more achieved. So these aren't bad things. Diversity is not a bad thing. That's not what I'm saying. But with that, with the newness, with renewal, becomes a need to ensure that that knowledge of procedure and process is passed down, is followed, is reiterated, is confirmed. So what are some of the problems that you can see coming up in reports and for students there? If you look at particularly the last section of Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting reports in the last agenda item, you can often see where those tensions come up. Things like at report adoption, not actually achieving consensus on the language. That's come up in the last in 2 meetings, particularly around the Russia-Ukraine crisis. There's things like trying to reach consensus when sometimes you don't actually need to achieve consensus under the processes and procedures. It's become a practice rather than what's actually the rule. And people kind of forgetting that they don't actually have to achieve a particular thing. They can pass on or handshake to a different institution on what they're trying to achieve. Opening agenda items at report adoption as well is something that is popping up a bit more, and that often seems to be because there's a lack of understanding of what is supposed to be achieved at this particular agenda item. And again, that sounds very process-driven, and it is, but because our agendas are so jam-packed, following that procedure is incredibly important. So what's the solution? It sounds really boring again, but back to basics. We've heard that a couple of times today. Back to basics on procedure, ensuring practice doesn't always overrule what perhaps is a really good procedure, ensuring that roles like the plenary chairs or the chairs of the different working groups are really well defined and they're really well connected, and you can see that smoothness of diplomatic, and this is, something that I don't do, but many in the room will do, that diplomatic relationships and ensuring that the meeting is on the same page as they operate during these really complex meetings. And I think that can help achieve what we're all trying to achieve here, a really good meeting. So look, it sounds really dull, but it's incredibly important given all the challenges we're talking to today. So download that Rules of Procedure book, everyone. That's my suggestion for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So, of course, we'll maybe have her knowledge when we discuss how actually the consensus is going on, how those are reflected in the reports. Huh? Okay, thank you. Okay, so maybe we will also go to Professor Chen, the professor at the University of the Fudan University in China, to have her perspective, especially from, if possible, a Chinese perspective on many of the issues that we have been discussing. Thank you, so Chen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shibata. Invite me here. This is the second time I'm here in KOPRI University to attend the workshop. So it's a very great event. Thank you very much. Actually, I have prepared a PPT PowerPoint, but only 5 minutes. So I will focus on very small points. It's about the freezing of sovereignty, Article 4 of the Antarctic Treaty of 1959, from the perspective of BBNJ application to the Antarctic Ocean. Okay, actually from the Chinese perspective, you know that China has been involved in the Antarctic governance since 1984. And last year, we just celebrate the 40-year anniversary for the governmental expedition to Antarctica. And the main, of course, China has been very actively involved in the Antarctic governance in the past 40 years. And the second issue is that I know that last year in the India ATCM, China submit a working paper. It's called Promote the Share of Best Practices of the Use of Renewable Energy in Antarctica, and which was adopted by the ATCM. I think this is one example that China has made contribution to the Antarctic governance. And we just try to find the solutions to face the climate change to the Antarctica. Okay, so this is the second point. And the most important thing is that a new issue is BBNJ. We know this is a very new issue in recent years. But my question here is, can the BBNJ agreement, once it takes legal effect, be applied in the Antarctic Ocean or Southern Ocean? I think it depends on the legal status of Antarctic Ocean or the Southern Ocean. As we know that the definition of Antarctic Ocean, under the Antarctic Treaty System, Antarctic seas or oceans are divided into two parts. The one part is the seas south of 60 south latitude from the perspective of geographic. And the second part is Antarctic convergence north of 60 south latitude from the perspective of geographic and ecological perspective. So two parts. And we know that as to the legal status of the Southern Ocean, there's still a lot of controversies. And the seven claimants of the Antarctic Treaty, they claims that they have the sovereignty to the marine areas pertinent to their Antarctic territories, like the territorial sea, EEZ, and the ice shelf, right? But the vast majority of states consider to be the high seas. The southern part, Southern Ocean, is the high seas, and the sub-oil is the so-called seabed oil under the UNCLOS. And the reason for the majority of states, the so-called non-claimant, is that have the followings. Number one, there's no the so-called coastal state on the Antarctic continent claiming and exercising sovereignty over Antarctic seas. And the second reason is that the delimitation of the Antarctic continent baseline lacks factual and legal basis. And the third reason is that Article 6 of the Antarctic Treaty specifies that the marine areas to which it applies are the high seas. The first reason is that the EEZ, Exclusive Economic Zone Declaration, constitutes a new claim or expanded claim to Antarctica, which was not allowed by Article 4. So there are still great controversies towards Article 4 and its affiliated seas. So since we know BBNJ will be applied to the high seas and the areas, so can we say that the ocean, Southern Ocean, is the high seas, or is a territorial sea or EEZ? So it depends on. I think in the future there will be. This is the cornerstone. We know Article 4 is the cornerstone of the whole ATS, as Mr. Nakamura, right? So, yeah, mentioned that the main principles is include the so-called use for the Antarctic use for peaceful purpose, and the freedom of scientific research and international cooperation, as well as environmental protection. But my my idea is that I think that Article 4, the so-called bifocal approach clause, or the agreement of disagree, right, is the cornerstone of the ATS. And based on that cornerstone, there are 4 pillars. Originally 3 pillars. Now today is 4 pillars. First one is used for peaceful purpose. The second one is the non-militarization. And the third one is the freedom of scientific research and international cooperation, and also the environmental protection. So we think I just here want to bring your attention to the Article 4, and further to consider whether the BBNJ can be applied in the so-called, generally speaking, the so-called Southern Ocean. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So I think we have had a good rounds of topic setting issues, and well, how should I do it? If Nakamura-san, if you have any comments to any of our topics, I think you are welcome to do that. Or I can also open the floor to have some of the comments from the floor. Maybe Nakamura-san, or thank you.
No, maybe we should go directly.
Thank you. Good, thank you. So, any questions or comments that you might want to make with regard to starting from the peaceful use, but based on the transparency mechanisms, and of course the background is the political tensions that are maybe entering into the Antarctic Treaty System, and of course the system works with the procedures and this procedural practice that has been established by the SDCM. Sometimes has been difficult nowadays, and the role of chairs, both of the plenary and also the working groups, are becoming much more important in order to, progress with the discussions. And of course, at the very foundation of the controversial or different views on many of the issues that the ATCM is dealing with is, of course, Article 4, and that is the assumption that we have different views on territory issues, and based on that, we try to cooperate. All right. So those are the summing up of the five speakers. And any comments from the audience or the panelists? Don't you including? Okay, so Natasha, thank you. So Natasha Gardiner is the PhD student at the University of Canterbury, but she's the CEP representative for New Zealand. So thank you, Natasha.
Thank you, Professor Shibata. Thank you, everyone, for really stimulating talks. I have a question specifically for Jeff McGee on some of the comments that you made. Yeah, I think you were quite right in saying that there has been this shift in quite critical discourse of the Antarctic Treaty System, and you spoke about the consensus decision-making model being a bit of a double-edged sword, which I would agree with. So just to get straight to my question, I'm wondering from your perspective whether or not the ATCM-CP is actually deserving of this criticism, with respect to those things that you spoke about that are within its control?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Natasha. Look, you might have picked up from my remarks that I think we need to be open and objective in terms of our appraisal of the performance of the ATCM and the CEP. We don't want to look at those institutions through rose-coloured glasses, certainly. But so in doing our analysis and our criticism, I think we need to be mindful that we don't ask the institutions to do more than what they can realistically do. And so that was my point about the broader climate change issue and the head of steam that's building up within the NGO and some parts of the academic community in regard to the ATCM and the CEP and climate change. The ATCM and the CEP involve a subgroup of countries that are all in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change negotiations. I mean, those negotiations under the UNFCCC have been going on since the early 1990s. That is the institution within the UN system that has been set up to drive a result in relation to reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. The ATCM and the CEP can do great science, channel that science into the UNFCCC meetings in the most powerful way it can, but ultimately the decision on reducing greenhouse gas emissions is going to come out of the UNFCCC, not out of the ATCM and not out of the CEP. So to that extent, I think the criticism of the ATCM that's been building up is a little ill-founded. But having said that, what the ATCM and CEP can do is to respond to climate change impacts in the region and do good things that can help lessen those climate change impacts. The emperor penguin issue, the marine protected areas issue in Kemlar are good efforts to try and make ecosystems more resilient from climate change impacts, okay? The failure of the ATCM and also Kemlar to be able to do that, the lack of consensus, I think is a legitimate criticism of those parts of the system. And so, yes, so that's, I guess, my response, Natasha.
Thank you.
Any further comments from the floor? Okay. Okay, Cassis. And Bill? Okay, so Bill first. Okay. Bill Curry is the assistant professor at the Tilburg University from the Netherlands, and he is also one of the early to mid-career scholar invited to this workshop under the support of the KOPRI and PCRC. Bill.
Thank you, Professor Shibata, and thank you for the entire panel. It's been a fascinating conversation. I'd like to pick up from the theme of the BB&J agreement brought up by Professor Chen, simply presenting a more open question to the panel. Do you see that, how would you see going forward the atmosphere in the Antarctic community towards the BB&J in general, especially in terms of a possible regime collision in terms of marine protected areas, about the idea of who has the authority and capacity to decide on protected areas, especially in the southern oceans, apart from the angles that were already brought out. This angle is something that interests me at this point. Thank you so much.
And Kes, yes, maybe we take your comments or question first. Kes Bastmeier, thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a small question. Combining this beautiful scheme on Japanese involvement in the Antarctic Treaty System, but mainly reflected in reports, but also the issue of transparency and in this very interesting speech. If I remember correctly, the final reports in the past were very explicit on who said what. So India responded to the introduction of the paper by stating, etc. Now, since a couple of years, we say one party stated that, and some parties or several parties, and that may also give some debates now and then. Would it be a good thing, or do you have an explanation for this shift in actually becoming less transparent? And would it be a good idea to bring the old tradition back to be quite explicit who said what in the meeting?
Okay. Yes. Yeah, maybe yes, please, indeed.
I think, Keith, we have gone back to looking at Ville because he's been on the ground with that. I'm pretty sure the most recent in Kochi, it did go back to talking when there was. And it's all lumping and splitting, right? That's what we talk about. I'm pretty sure we've gone back to naming Yeah, and it's always at the discretion of the chairs and the discretion of the parties who adopt the report whether or not someone is named. So it's a practice of the parties, not a practice by us. We try and follow what we're directed to do. But I'm pretty sure we did. I need to check that, but I'm pretty sure we've gone back to naming when there's one. Yeah, and we can't lump everyone together in one common approach. I believe that's what's happened. And I believe that's a good thing. Yeah, I believe that's much better for transparency. Yeah.
So any other on this issue of the reporting, which is actually an interesting phenomena. And of course, for the outside, again, the transparent issues, basically that's what the public see from us. And I think it's very important how we reflect that. We means ATCM, the consultative parties, reflect the reports. And I think the chair has a huge role in it, I think. So in 2 years, Japan and of course after that, Korea will be in that position to how they would like to have the reports publicized for the general public. But on that issue of the reports, final reports being the almost only a medium that we can give the message, what the ATCM is doing to the public. Any comments on that? So if not, maybe we go back to the BBNJ issues. Would you like to? Yes, Nakamura-san, please. Thank you.
Allow me to add another question related to BBNJ to Dr. Shin. So I took carefully note of what you said about the really critical importance of Article 4 in the Antarctic Treaty System, to which I cannot but agree. So I listed only 3 pillars and included Article 4 in the first pillar. That does not mean that I disregard the importance of that article. And I'm aware, and I realized from your explanation, so how it remains difficult, the discussions or closing the different understandings of that article among different parties. And with that said, my question relates to knowing your frank impression, understanding about, in spite of that difficulties, in spite of the difficulties that involves in understanding accurately the interrelations between the BBNJ on the one hand, the ATS on the other, how you think about the possibility, nevertheless, of the kind of practical or pragmatic cooperation between the ATS on the one hand and the BBNJ once it entered into force. So as for me personally, I already explained that we think we should nevertheless pursue such pragmatic cooperation with the BBNJ, but I want to have a Chinese perspective or understanding on such possibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I might inject a more controversial issue into discussions. So when we have that kind of issue like BBNJ, which touches upon the fundamental disputes with regard to the territorial sovereignty in Antarctica, one way, which I do not recommend, one way is to just not touch upon it. And the bioprospecting was a kind of an issue that has not been progressed because there are some parties who now want that to be discussed, so that that discussion is almost dormant at this moment. So it's kind of not to have the controversial discussion in ATCM, and we just leave that agenda item from the ATCM, which I don't think is the way forward. And the same is true for the BBNJ. And I know because of the Article 4 and because of some of the different views on the BBNJ first and also on the Article 4, of course it's easier not to discuss it. However, as Nakamura-san has mentioned, if the BBNJ has entered, I think there is no other choice for the Antarctic Treaty consultative parties and the Nakamura members to actually have to come to a certain view on the BBNJ. Although many of the parties to the Antarctic Treaty or the Nakamura might not be a party to the BBNJ treaty. But again, because of the consensus, if a country considers that that should not be discussed in ATCM, that would be the case. I think it comes down to this agenda setting role of the chairs, and that you also said the congestion of the agenda items in it, and of course the controversial ones will take more time rather than the. What do you think of this, controversial agenda setting, and to have a time to discuss it, even though we almost know that we would not have the resolution at least at the ATCM, but maybe further into the future, especially in the BBNJ. Do you have any prospects or not? Indeed, thank you.
Well, just looking at the form and function of the BBNJ and its need to actually work with whichever organisation or institution that is in place on the high seas area, I think regardless, the Antarctic Treaty parties will be involved in discussions with any sort of area-based management that may come in under a BBNJ in the designated area. But in terms of the actual meetings, I think I don't think we can show. I think it will continue. I think even in the last report they mentioned that it will be discussed in future years. I can't see them coming to a resolution looking at the wording of what happened last year. I think that's a question for the chair to know where the conversation is going to go before it actually happens. So that's good diplomatic practice. That's understanding where the negotiations of the conversations will go. I don't think it will be resolved anytime soon. And I think it would have to have that limiting the chair would need to implement a limit. We'll speak for this for 2 hours, and we have to move on. It can't be like many other discussions in the past, like the Helsinki Declaration negotiations and all those sorts of things. They just got a bit unwieldy and you can see that reflected in the writing. So I think that's got to be really tightly controlled by the chair and not be partnered with too many other things as well, especially protected species, all those sorts of things as well. So yeah. But I guess this year we'll see, because I'm pretty sure it's on the agenda again. Oh, yeah. I know. We'll have to look at this report. Yeah.
Yes, Jeff, please.
Can I just make one comment, Professor Shibata, in relation to that issue? And thank you, Professor Chen, for your very, very good comments in relation to Article 4. I mean, the beauty of Article 4, going back to 1959, has been its ability to accommodate the positions of different states in terms of the sovereignty issues, claimants, non-claimants, and what's often referred to as the semi-claimants, the United States and Russian Federation. So I guess the fact that these things are not clear and Article 4, in essence, doesn't resolve them is a kind of positive in terms of the way the system is operating. It allows the views of different states in relation to these issues to be respected and not detracted from. But having said that, the BBNJ agreement, I can't off the top of my head put my finger on the article, but it's early on in the treaty, has that important provision, which I think was the deft way in which the BBNJ negotiations proceeded in relation to this, and that is the provision which says the BBNJ treaty applies to the extent that it doesn't undermine existing regional arrangements. So looking at that article, if the ATS institutions, both the treaty institutions and also the Kamla Convention, are able to point to existing rules and institutions around those key elements of the BBNJ treaty, being environmental impact assessment, biological prospecting, and also the MPA issue. If the ATS institutions are able to show that they're already in essence, covering the field in relation to those matters, then on one view, the BBNJ treaty wouldn't apply in the below 60 degrees south to that extent. So, as my understanding, as I said, it's my understanding that was the kind of deft way in which that issue was sort of dealt with within the BBNJ negotiations. So, yes, that's just by way of observation.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so then I think we can go to two other topic setting talks, more on the side of science now. So may I ask Professor Satoshi Imura, Director, Center for Antarctic Program, National Institute of Polar Research, to have his comment on science and operational aspects within the ATCM. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm afraid because my talk should be very simple and superficial. Yeah, it is just from the point of logistics, on-site logistics, not the science. Okay. So, Antarctic research expedition is basically a national project, but international cooperation is essential due to Antarctic quite remote locations and the extremely harsh environment. So each Antarctic Antarctic national operations are sometimes sharing the transport systems such as airplanes, helicopters, or icebreakers, and also infrastructures in the research stations, and help each other by establishing rescue systems in case of trouble. Of course, political ideologies sometimes came into play, but fundamentally it can be said that human relationships has been established that transcend the national barriers in Antarctica. It was 5 years ago. One Japanese expeditioner had serious health problem in shore station. It was March, should be. Yeah, end of March. At the time, she was in the station. Yeah. But at the time, Japanese icebreaker Shirase had already left the station. Then she cannot back to the shore station. There was no way to rescue the patient made by Japanese ourselves. At the time, fortunately, Russian icebreaker came to pick up the patient and medical doctors to Cape Town City. And now she regained health, no problem. It was in 2020, before the Russian invasions. But I believe such situation is not changed even now in Antarctica. So such a rescue sharing between nations and the cooperative rescue systems are what gives rise to the uniqueness of Antarctic operations as a national project under the system of international cooperation. And also, I have been in Antarctica in total 8 times, and including foreign research stations of Italy, the United States, and Belgium. But there were no complicated international interactions involved. Based on agreement between the researchers, they are incorporated into the research project very naturally. As a national project, Antarctic operation is an extremely open and mutually contributing organizing in both logistics and research. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unless we have a burning comments or question to Imura-san, I think we can also take another topic setting talk by Ms. Yumi Nakayama, a journalist from the Asahi Shimbun, and she has been to Antarctica 3 times, attached to the Japan's expedition, and she has like a blog on the Antarctic issue. So I'm sure that she's a fan of the Antarctic issue. So Nakayama-san, please, the floor is yours.
Hi. So my name is Yumi Nakayama. So let me first introduce myself. I'm a reporter for the Asahi newspaper. And I would like to say I'm a very rare journalist. I went 8 times Arctic and 3 times Antarctica. I accompanied the Japanese Antarctic research expedition, twice winter team and once summer team. And now I'm working as a reporter. And sometimes I visit to schools and some places to give lectures about Antarctica and the Arctic. At the end of my lecture, I always talk about the Antarctic Treaty. I explain the Antarctic Treaty is an ideal international treaty because Antarctica shall be used for peaceful purposes only, and the treaty freezes territorial claim to Antarctica. My senior reporter talked often, the 4 words should be like an Antarctica. Think about Antarctica as everyone's property, not someone else's. That means there's no conflict. Now is the time when every country must cooperate and work together to stop global warming. There's no more time left. But the reality is quite different. Rather the opposite. The leaders of big countries are becoming more and more nationalist. And they care about profits only for the country, don't care about others and the global environment. Look at the example of the Arctic, Greenland. The next president of America wants Greenland for military purpose. Some other countries are interested in Greenland's underground resources too. Antarctica, fortunately, has been protected by its geographical distance. Maybe it's good to think also the Antarctica is too cold. However, I'm uncertain whether international commitment will be kept in the future. And in addition, on the way to Kobe this morning, I found the article of the magazine, National Geographic, you know. And I was very surprised. Yeah, this article, some scientists want to have cats at McMurdo Station, main America's Antarctic base. The article says, pets of any kind have long been banned from the research base located on Antarctica, but a cat-loving group of scientists want to change that. I was so surprised. So my anxiety is growing more and more. I wonder what I can do now. Anyway, the Antarctica Treaty is not widely known to the general public, actually. At least I want to continue to tell people what the Antarctic Treaty is and the idealistic spirit. I'm sure we have a responsibility to maintain the Antarctica as a national reserve devoted to peace and science. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. It's very, very nice. So, Yoncho, maybe you have, yes, I think I thought so. Thank you.
Well, I actually have a question that is pretty open for anyone. And I think I can even save this question for tomorrow's informal consultation. Now, what are the transparency promotion mechanism that we can think of now? Allow more on-site so that there are more people who can listen? Or are we going to find a way to arrange more communication outside so that we know who says what? But that's good. So what are the real mechanisms that we can think of for that purpose? And secondly, then, how will it help with the awkward situations that are arising from consensus-based decision-making. If we just let people know more what is happening inside, is that going to release the pressure itself? Perhaps not. However, it may sound frustrating. It's maybe better to work to find a common ground. I don't know the solution, but first, I wanted to know how people think about transparency promotion mechanism, and secondly, how it will help with the actual difficulties we are facing.
Very open question. Yes. Maybe for those of you who are not familiar with the ATCMs, those meetings are closed, except for the opening plenary. So all the media are not allowed to go into the meetings after the first few hours of the plenary. So again, what I have said, the public knows what has happened only through the reports of the ATCM. But now we have the journalist, very interested in Antarctic issues. She has been to Antarctica, but she cannot come into the ATCM to report on what happening in India. So that's what the Yunchul was saying. So this is a different type of a transparency, more public transparency of the ATCM. Any view on this? I don't know whether, because it's written on the rules of procedure, so it's not the discretion of the chair. So that, yes, okay, yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, and also having a journalist in the room. I see some arguments to have a more open approach. So the preamble in the Antarctic Treaty and the preamble of the protocol both state that we govern the Antarctic in the benefit of all mankind, which is now humankind, of course. So I would say that members of humankind might actually know what has been said by whom, and maybe also a more direct way than only through the final report. It could possibly also make, on the one hand, and you already suggested it, I think, consultative parties more careful in what they say. So it might be becoming also less transparent about their thinking, and that might, in the consensus-making process, a bit difficult, because you have to understand the other to actually have a good process of consensus-making. On the other hand, if consensus means the absence of objections, objections may be made a little bit less frequent. So it might also be actually positive in a sense that consensus is reached more often. So I'm not sure about this, but I can only tell you, this is my own thinking, just thinking out loud, but the Netherlands is quite keen on having this debate, and it might well be that there is a working paper for next ATCM on this topic, on transparency, possibly also including this element. So maybe also interesting for the journalist, at least in the room, to know that this is not for everyone a completely logical situation as we have it now. Yeah.
Nakamura-san, so you also mentioned in your speech that Japan would be interested in the issue of education outreach. This really touches upon also this issue, because you cannot do outreach unless you can have the involvement of the general public. Do you have any more specific idea how Japan, because I haven't really seen an active role of Japanese delegation on this agenda item while I was in the ATCM. So it was a good surprise that Japan is interested in this education and outreach and agenda. You have any specific idea how Japan would be engaged in this agenda item?
Thank you for your question. So maybe let me start by more concretely elaborating what I mean by highlighting transparency. I'm thinking about transparency in kind of two ways. Firstly, transparency among the parties, or more accurately, the consultative parties. So it is in this context that I highlighted the importance on the discussion on the EIES. So not to the public, rather among the parties. That is one thing. Secondly, transparency in relation to the scientific communities outside the ATS. SCAR-CAMLA, of course, but IPCC, scientific communities connected or associated to the BBNJ, for example, or Arctic Council, or even, why not, in some context, for example, biodiversity-related scientific communities. So I think this channel also extremely important, because it is only by sharing and comparing notes among those different scientific communities where we can genuinely create resonant effects or more amplifying message from the really overall scientific communities worldwide. And regarding the relation with the public, maybe it may sound contradictory to what Professor Bastmeyer talked about, but at least from my perspective, the practice of the ATS does not seem, more, closed than other, for example, international regime. For example, when we have a look at what is happening in the COP, it's basically the same. The session is really public. The plenary session is really public. And most of the discussions or negotiations of the COP taking place either in the closed session without observer attendance, or even on the corridor or a closed room. Yeah. And the only outcome we can know about the COP29 or whatever is the series of COP decisions. But as far as I know, there are only very few voices criticizing the closeness of the COP. So that is why. So my sense is that the ATS practice is not to be excessively blamed or criticized. But what I mean by education and outreach activities is that probably there can be rooms for respective national delegations to more actively reach out and send messages either to their domestic constituency, domestic public opinions, or even more broadly internationally. And I think that efforts can be strengthened, at least in terms of Japanese context. And we can say the same thing about the education. Maybe the value and the achievement done by the ATS can be more highlighted in the education or more broadly sensitization efforts towards domestic public opinions. And that was basically what I intended.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any comment? Okay, so yes, we do. Yes, Nakamura-san, thank you.
So thank you. Maybe I'm sorry, I'm not to change the subject, but actually, Polo and Antarctic research and science contributed to the clarifying and also the the progress in the climate science. I mean, to promote understanding the climate system. So and also the Antarctic area is really one of the vulnerable area impacted by climate change. My question then, first go to the Imura sensei, because maybe as a polar scientist and the who undertaken the research in the Antarctic. Antarctica. In that case, do you see some kind of difficulty and barriers increasing? I mean, due to the climate change. Maybe that's maybe I hope that my question is quite clear. You know, some kind of change in the climate have some impact on the undertaking the research and science in the Antarctic area. That is my question. And I think actually already Professor McGee suggested some action needed, for instance, to protect the species in Antarctica. My second question maybe go to the Nakayama-san and maybe possibly Professor McGee. The proposal and paper submitted by Chinese delegation about the increasing use of renewable is one of the, I think, action. But maybe other action to protect the Antarctic area, the activity, against the climate change. So that is the question, maybe how to enhance the climate action in the Antarctica and the other in the world. I hope that my question reach you with the clarity. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, so the climate change in Antarctica is not so simple because there are some parts of the Antarctic, for example, the Antarctic Peninsula area, the air temperature and the ocean temperature should be rising very seriously, and all the glaciers are melting and some ice shelves are broken. It's so heavy impact was done in Antarctic Peninsula area. But in short station area, there is no effect of Antarctic weather change. No temperature rising is recorded, and the ocean is very stable, and the sea ice is very stable and heavy. So for Japanese station, we cannot feel the change of climate. Yeah, I don't know if it is good or not, but yeah, we cannot observe such a change, so we cannot answer such a question. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Professor Shibata, and thank you, Professor Nakamura, for your question. Look, as I mentioned in my comments, I think it is really important for the ATCM and the CEP to do what it can in relation to climate change impacts in the region and also reducing greenhouse gases within the region. So the CEP, of course, has had an ongoing climate change response program over the last 5 or 7 years, doing work in relation to the issue. There's been important work done in relation to reducing emissions from research stations, which I know is important. And so I think that's certainly very tangible progress that can be made by the parties in that regard. Also, the paper you mentioned also about renewables from China. Again, that's a good step forward in relation to reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the region. So I certainly think those types of matters need to be furthered, and also the parties, as I mentioned earlier, need to see the importance of preemptive or even precautionary steps that might be made to assist the ecosystems of the Antarctic region adapt to not only the climate change impacts we're seeing now, albeit of mixed geography, as was just mentioned recently, take a more of a precautionary approach and not wait for scientific certainty before acting in order to allow ecosystems to have that resilience and ability to respond to those impacts of climate change that we're expecting over the next decade and more.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for your active engagement in this panel on peace and science. And of course, we have already touched upon the next theme, which is the environmental protection and natural reserve concept. But we'll resume this second panel from 4:30. So please come back punctually at 4:30 here. And we'll change the seating arrangement. So the students will help you to where to go from now. Okay. So thank you for your engagement.